There's no question that the vast majority of people out there, if they saw a child in trouble, they would immediately drop everything to go help that child, regardless of risk to their personal safety. Today's story is an example of exactly that. However, it also goes to show that no matter the situation, you always need to be alert and you always need to be prepared. But before we get into that encounter, if you've had an encounter or know a story that you'd like to have shared here on the show, please email me at the link below. If you like today's story, gently slap that like button. And if you haven't done so already, especially if you're a return viewer, hit that subscribe button. While you're at it, reach up, grab that notification bell so you don't miss out on any future content. Now, let's get into today's encounter. Early in the fall of 2009, a 61-year-old career farmer named Ray purchased an additional 600 acres for his family farm up in northwestern Minnesota. Ray, he was a father of 5, and he had grown up farming, and it was a way of life for him. His father had grown up farming, his grandfather had grown up farming, and it was something that he absolutely loved, and all 5 of his children absolutely loved farming as well. And when they got older, all 5 of them took up the family business. So Ray's family in total owned over 6,000 acres in northwestern Minnesota. This 600-acre plot of land was a lot different than the rest of the properties that the family owned. See, their family was used to agricultural farming, and this particular property was, before they bought it, was strictly a cattle farm. So it was going to take a lot of work to get this property up and running and profitable for the family. Luckily enough, though, this property was only located about 30 minutes away from Ray's primary property, where he lived with his wife, his 2 younger sons, and his oldest daughter, Erin. Now, Erin, she was 24 years old, and she was looking to kind of start her own life, but still wanted to be a part of the family business, but she just really kind of wanted to break away from the constant watchful eye of her parents and really have her own freedoms. So she ended up going to Ray and asked him, Dad, would it be okay if on this new property, if I set up like a ready to move home or had a small house built, kind of had the place to myself? I'll take care of the property, I'll get it ready, I'll clear everything out of the way so that we can plant our crops. I still want to be part of the family business. I just really want to kind of start my own life and have my own place. Ray, he thought about it for a few minutes, and he was really kind of torn. He did not want to see his daughter leave, but at least if she went to this property, she'd only be a half hour away, and it's not like she would be moving off to the city, which he absolutely did not want for his daughter. And it did make him happy that she said she still wanted to be a part of their family business for their farm. So kind of with a heavy heart to really see his daughter leaving, Ray ended up giving her his blessing, and they made a plan that once they took possession of the property in that fall, that they would set up a big camper trailer on the property for her to live in throughout the fall, and then in the winter she would move back home. So in early September, once they took possession, they moved the family's large 5th-wheel trailer onto the one portion of the property. They brought over a bunch of their heavy equipment, and Erin almost immediately got to work clearing various portions of the land and getting it ready for the next year. Now, this property that they had purchased, it was not 600 acres all connected together. It was actually fairly spread out. There was one quarter section of land that was about 160 acres on one side of this long gravel road that ran for about 5 miles off of a main highway. And right on the other side of that gravel road was another 160 acres. And then about a mile down the road, they had another 160. And then about a half mile past that, they had a 120-acre plot there as well. So Erin's plan of attack for clearing all this land was that she was going to start with the most difficult part of it first, which just so happened to be that very far 120-acre plot. Now, what made that particular spot so difficult to deal with was not the fact that it was located the furthest away, it was the fact of the terrain itself. See, most of the other property was fairly heavily used by cattle, so the ground was fairly flat, fairly compact. Yeah, there would be big rocks, there would be some stands of trees, but for the most part, it would be fairly easy for her to deal with those properties. However, that 120-acre spot was very muddy, very boggy. In fact, all along the entire one side of the property was very marshy. It was almost like a big bog. And on the other side was really thick brush and really thick bush that butted up just to this very small little field. And Erin knew in order for that spot to become profitable, she would have to clear all of those trees and all of that brush. And she knew from past experiences working on other properties with her dad and with her brothers that that muddy and boggy terrain was going to be incredibly difficult to deal with, and she was expecting for their heavy equipment to get stuck fairly regularly, which is why she wanted to start with that part first. So once Erin was all settled in the trailer, she made it her daily routine to wake up, go out to the family backhoe, drive it down the road to that 120-acre plot, and at the end of the day, she would drive back. She did that because she did not want to risk leaving it sitting on that muddy terrain, risking it sinking in the mud, and having a hard time getting it out again. So for about 2 weeks, every day, that's exactly what she did. She would get up, she would get out to the backhoe, drive to that portion of the property, and she would spend the entire day meticulously clearing rocks, clearing brush, and at the end of the day, she'd make her way back to the trailer. And that just kind of became her life for that 2 weeks. However, one day while she was out working in the fields, she ended up getting the backhoe stuck in the mud right before dark. She tried and she tried and she just could not get this thing to budge. Now, this was nothing new to Erin. She had gotten equipment stuck before. She had seen her brothers get it stuck. Her dad had got it stuck. And she knew how she could deal with it, but she would not be able to deal with it until the morning. So in this moment, she was really faced with one of two options. And that was option one was to call her dad, have him drive from his place the half hour out to where she was, pick her up, and take her back to the trailer. Or option two was for her just to suck it up and walk the 2 miles back. Now, Erin, being a farm girl, growing up out in the country, growing up out in the woods, a 2 mile walk down a gravel road was absolutely nothing for her. Even if it was in the dark, it was something that she had done growing up all the time, and it really did not faze her. So she got out of the equipment, she locked it up, made her way through the wet, sticky mud back up to the road. Once she got to the road, she just started walking back in the direction of her trailer. She walked for about a mile and she came to a small left-hand turn on the gravel road. Once she came around that turn, her neighbor's property came into view. This neighbor's property, they had these really bright yard lights that cast pretty far out into their fields, and it also cast light right across the gravel road and lit up the entire bush line right along it. As she got a little bit closer towards this neighbor's house, all of a sudden, out of the corner of her eye, she saw something up along that tree line. So she immediately turned her head, looked in that direction, and she noticed that there was a little girl standing about 30 yards away that appeared to be about 8 or 9 in age. She was wearing this whitish gray dress and had this long black hair, and she was just standing in this ditch looking down at the ground, and it sounded like she was giggling. Erin immediately found this to be strange, even though she grew up on a farm and her brother spent countless hours outside at night. Never once would her or her brothers at that age be out alone, especially that close to a woodline, just because of the fact that there's wild animals, and it's just really not safe for a young child to be out in the dark like that. So she immediately called out to this little girl. She just basically said, "Hey, sweetie," and kind of waved to her. And this little girl did not respond. She just kept standing there looking at the ground. Erin did not quite know what to make of that. She just figured that, this little girl was probably told not to talk to strangers. That's probably why she's not responding. She's not waving. She's probably just nervous. She was not expecting somebody to come around the corner. So Erin just very slowly made her way just a little bit closer. When she got about 20 yards from this little girl, she turned, looked back towards her neighbor's house, thinking maybe this was their daughter, and then she turned her head back to where that little girl was, and she was just gone. Erin immediately just started calling out to her, just basically calling out, "Hey, where did you go? Come out of the bush, it's not safe." And there was no response at all. Erin stood there for a couple of seconds trying to figure out what to do. She did not know who this little girl was. She did not know if she was this neighbor's daughter. So she decided that she was going to go up to the neighbor's house just to check. So she went up to the house and she knocked on the door. The door opened up and there was about a 70-year-old man standing in front of her. Erin ended up saying, "Excuse me, sir, do you happen to have a young daughter? There was a little girl in the ditch. I think she went into the woods and she's not coming out." The man ended up saying, "I do have a daughter, but she's about 50 now, so I highly doubt that was her." Erin ended up saying, "Well, sir, I know I saw a young girl. Like, is there somebody else on the road that has a young daughter?" The guy ended up telling her that, yeah, there is a house further down the road, but they do not have any children, and that he really had no idea who this little girl could be. He ended up asking her, "Are you sure you saw a little girl? Are you sure, you didn't see a coyote or something or just a shadow?" And Erin's like, "Yes, I saw a little girl in the ditch." And the man had basically said, like, "Oh, I don't know what to tell you. There's no kids along this street at all." So with that, Erin basically just said, "Okay, thank you, sir." And she made her way back up to the road. Once she got to the road, again, she started calling out to this child, trying to get them to come out of the bush, but there was no response at all. So Erin started to think, did I really see a little girl? It's been a very long day. I've been outside all day. It's dark. Maybe I really didn't see what I think I saw. Maybe, I'm just overtired. So she made her way all the way back to her trailer. The entire time, she just kept thinking about this little girl on the side of the road, and she was trying to debate whether or not she should contact the police and just tell them that there's some little girl wandering around out in the woods. But after thinking about it for a little while, she basically came to the conclusion that she was just overtired and she just needed to get to sleep. So she lied down in her bed and started to drift off. Right as she was finally starting to drift off, she was abruptly woken up by the sound of tapping on the side of the trailer. She quickly sat up, just listening, trying to figure out what she had just heard, when she realized that that tapping sound was coming from the door, which meant that somebody was outside knocking on it. So she got up out of bed, she made her way towards the door, she looked out the window, and she didn't see anybody there at all. At this point, she just kind of brushed it off, thinking, maybe it was a squirrel, maybe it was a raccoon, something just brushed up against the bottom of the trailer. So she started making her way back to her bed. Right as she got to her bed, all of a sudden she heard what sounded like a little girl calling for help, coming from outside the trailer in behind it towards the far bush line. With that, she immediately kind of went into like a protective mode. She immediately thought of that little girl on the side of the road and just instantly assumed that that little girl was in trouble and she needed to go help. So she quickly put on her jacket, she put on her boots, and because she didn't know what the problem was, she's just assuming that it was most likely animal related. She grabbed her .45 and then she ran from the trailer. She went around the side, around the back, and started running towards that far bush line. That bush line was about 75 yards away, and the entire time as she was running, she just kept yelling out, I'm coming, where are you?" And she could periodically hear this little girl sounding like she's yelling for help. Once she got to the bush line, Erin stopped and just kind of listened trying to figure out where this little girl was. She called out again, and then she heard this little girl yelling for help. It sounded like it was coming from about 100 yards down along the bush line where there was this old collapsed homestead. So Erin started running in that direction. Once she got up towards where this old homestead was, she started to feel a little bit off as she could kind of start to see the silhouette of this homestead come into view. Now, this homestead was not an actual house. It was basically just a fallen pile of debris of rock and wood with a very vague outline along the bottom of an old foundation of a home. As she got closer towards it, she just kept feeling like there was this weird malevolence in the air. Like she just felt very uneasy, very on edge. The air felt very heavy. So as she's going closer and closer towards it, this feeling just kept getting stronger, and Erin just could not shake it. As she got up, right up towards the front of this homestead, she could see up along the front there's a bit of an opening where the door used to be. So she starts making her way towards it. She's yelling out to this little girl, "Where are you? Where are you?" When all of a sudden she could hear what sounds like sobbing coming from inside the ruins of that homestead. She instantly reaches in her pocket to pull out a small flashlight. She turns it on, she shines it right towards the opening of those ruins, but she can't see anything at all. So she makes her way very cautiously closer, shining the light inside, kind of trying to look around to see if she could see this little girl. She can't see her, but she can continue to hear that sobbing coming from inside those ruins. So once she gets right up to the door, she kind of kneels down, she shines the light in, she's looking around, when all of a sudden she catches a glimpse of that whitish gray dress on the far side. So she kind of squats down a little bit more, starts making her way inside, calling out to this little girl, basically just saying, "It's okay, you're safe, I'm here." This little girl did not respond. She just continued sitting in this corner. So as Erin got closer, she's shining the light, trying to get a better look at her, and she realizes that this little girl is almost like curled up in a ball, rocking in the corner of these ruins. So she keeps making her way closer, trying to get underneath the fallen timber boards that used to be the frame of the homestead, dodging big shards of rock. Once she gets right up beside her, she just says, "Hey, it's okay, sweetheart, I'm here, you're safe now." And she reaches her hand out to grab this little girl's shoulder, and as soon as she touches this little girl's shoulder, this little girl swings around, looks right at her, and just lets out this like earth shattering, almost like demonic scream right in Erin's face. And what made this even more horrifying for Erin was the fact that this little girl, she was incredibly pale. She had very long, dark hair. But what was worst of all was this little girl's eyes. Her eyes were just completely black, almost like they were completely lifeless or soulless. And they were just looking right at her as this little girl was screaming. And this scream just basically shook like every bone in Erin's body. It was a sound that she had never heard anybody make before. Erin, in this exact moment, was absolutely terrified. She had no idea what was going on. She had no idea really what this was in front of her. And her first instinct was just to get out of there. So she quickly turned around. She's scrambling, trying to crawl underneath all those boards and all that rock. Once she finally gets out of those ruins, she stands up and she just starts running as fast as she can all the way back to her trailer. Periodically, she turns around to shine the light to see if this little girl's following her. And the very first time she turned around just to see, she was really not expecting to see this little girl following her at all. It was kind of more just like a fear response to make sure that she's not being followed. But when she turned around and shone the light in that direction, this little girl was only standing about 50 yards behind her, just standing there completely motionless, staring in her direction. Erin just continued just running as fast as she could all the way back to the trailer. When she got to the trailer, she turned again, shone the light back in that direction, and this little girl was now about 30 yards away from her, even closer than before, and again, just standing there, staring right at her. Erin at this point was not going to waste any time. She was not even going to bother going into the trailer. She just headed straight for her truck. She got in, she started it up, and she just floored it as fast as she could down the drive back up to that gravel road. Once she got to the gravel road, she turned onto it to head back up towards that main highway, and she looked in her rearview mirror, and this little girl was standing right at the end of her driveway on that gravel road, staring at her truck as she drove away. Erin at this point just basically headed all the way back to her parents' house. When she got there, she was completely shaken up, almost inconsolable, and she was telling her parents and her dad and her brothers like exactly what had happened, and that she had no idea what this was. She had no idea who this little girl was, just that this little girl was definitely not human, and that she was just not going back to that property. The next day, her brothers and her dad actually went back to that property just to see if they could figure out what had happened. They ended up going up to that old homestead, and that old homestead that the night before was still standing just enough that Erin was able to get into was now completely collapsed all in on itself. Erin never went back to that property. She ended up moving onto another property that her parents owned. And over the years, she did quite a bit of research online to what she had experienced. And the closest thing that she was able to come up with was black-eyed children or some other type of paranormal entity. Well, that's it for today's encounter. I want to know your thoughts on this. Do you think what Erin encountered was one of these black-eyed children? Or do you think that this was something completely different? But as always, thanks for joining us. I do have to apologize if you heard a bunch of noise coming from above me. We just got a new puppy, so my Malinois and this puppy have just basically been play fighting 24/7 for the past week, so it's a little bit noisy. But again, thanks for joining us, and if you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.